Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I just returned from my summer stint at camp. For the past 5 years, I've spent part of my summer at our regional camp, URJ Camp Coleman, serving on faculty alongside clergy and educators from across our movement. While the air is thick and sticky in the North Georgia mountains and the bugs are always bugging, it is truly what I believe should be considered Judaism's happy place. What do you think after having gone? Yeah, we agree? The camp is filled with kids who don't just learn about Jewish values, but live them. Kehila, community, kavod, respect, chesed, kindness, and shalom, peace. There is no shortage of any of them at Camp Coleman. Ask any camper at any given moment, and they can tell you what each of these values means, where they see them at camp, and where they hope to bring them in the rest of their lives. If anyone ever worries about the future of Judaism and the Jewish people, I would encourage them to spend even an hour at Camp Coleman. You'll leave knowing that we are, in fact, in very good hands. Like any youth community, campers are discovering who they are, who they want to become, and how they want to get there. Camp has clear rules and policies for safety and security, but it also invites campers to help shape the kind of community that they want to live in. Our camp director thoughtfully set up a Dear Amy box in the Chadar, the dining hall, where anyone could anonymously or openly share suggestions, concerns, or questions. This summer, that box filled up after 2 programs held back to back. One about anti-Semitism taught by an outside organization, followed the next morning by a session on Israel led by our Mishlachat, the Israeli educators. More than a dozen teenagers, 14 to 15 years old, wrote thoughtful letters reflecting on what they had learned, how they were processing Israel, their experiences with anti-Semitism, and what place they believed those conversations should have at camp, while also balancing the joy of simply being teenagers with their friends. What made me proud wasn't that they all agreed, because they didn't. It was how many of them took time to write and the level of care in every single letter. We invited them to an optional conversation during their free time, expecting a handful of campers, if any even at all. More than 10 showed up. What they shared gave me tremendous hope that morning. They want the freedom to love Israel in their own way. They want to show up for the Jewish community. They want to live proudly as Jews. One camper shared that she is the only Jewish student in her school, and her synagogue doesn't even have a rabbi. Another camp, she said, is the only place where she feels safe enough to have these conversations. Another camper said he feels the weight of everything happening in Israel and wants more information so he can wrestle with it himself. I don't want people telling me what to think, he said. I want to figure out what I think. They were thoughtful, honest, and compassionate. And they also reminded us that they are still teenagers after all, stubborn at times, emotional, idealistic, and occasionally convinced that they have all the answers. It was classic adolescence. In some ways, they reminded me of the Israelites in this week's Torah portion. Parshat Akev finds the Israelites standing at the edge of a new chapter. Moses is preparing to say goodbye. The people he addresses are largely the generation born into the wilderness. They have grown up with freedom, but freedom alone has not made them mature. They have spent some years learning who they were, who they are, when to question, when to listen, when to challenge, and how to build a community together. Moses knows at this point that he cannot lead them forever. He has taught them Torah, modeled leadership, and guided them through the wilderness. And soon, they will be left to make the choices for themselves. So he reminds them what matters most. You shall love the eternal your God and serve God, b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha, with all of your heart and with all of your soul. And just a few verses later, he tells them, and you shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your home, when you walk on your way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. Notice what Moses doesn't say. He doesn't just simply tell them to obey. He tells them to love. Because rules alone aren't enough. You can teach commandments, you can establish expectations, you can create structure. But love, commitment, and a sense of belonging cannot simply be commanded. Those are inspired. They are modeled. They are nurtured over time. They are built into the very fabric of our lives. As leaders, as parents, as teachers, as camp professionals, clergy, and community members, we spend so much of our lives hoping that what we have tried to teach will one day become something our students and children genuinely choose for themselves. Eventually, every generation has to make Judaism its own. The Israelites, as we know, were not perfect. Once they entered the Promised Land, life was anything but idyllic. They struggled, stumbled, and made plenty of mistakes. But they cared enough to keep teaching. They passed these stories and these values to their children, and because they did, we are still reading them thousands of years later. That is my hope for this generation as well. If my experience at camp taught me anything, it is that these teenagers already know what Moses hoped the Israelites would have, not just the knowledge, but the heart and the soul. They know our values. They ask the hard questions. They care deeply about their community and being in relationship with each other. They want to wrestle with what it means to be Jewish rather than inherit someone else's answers. And that gives me hope. Because when Moses tells the Israelites to walk in all the way God's ways and to love God, he isn't asking for blind obedience. He is asking them to become people whose values shape the way they walk through the world. This is what I saw at Camp Coleman this summer, and this is what I pray for all of us. May we continue to build our community so it is one where questions are welcomed, where love is stronger than fear, and where every generation and each of us are inspired not only to know our tradition, but to carry it forward with all of our heart and all of our soul. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.